This is a really terrible analogy, but it's funny. I was reading this article about a guy who stole a bunch of Viagra and took it. He ended up having an erection that lasted for 5 days and he had to check himself into the hospital. There are certain things in life that like in doses are great. You know, at the extreme amount, they're really hard on your body. Scaling is hard because you're so overstimulated. Having normal conversations and getting into a healthy pattern is really difficult.
Welcome to Eating Glass. It's a podcast where in each episode, we ask startup founders the questions no one else will. Our goal? To reveal what it's actually like to start, scale, and exit a company. I'm Joe LeMay, and I bootstrapped my reusable notebook company, Rocketbook, to a $50 million exit.
And I am Will Nitze, founder and CEO at IQ Bar, a nutrition company I took from 0 to 40 plus million in annual revenue. For better or worse, we are your hosts. Eating Glass is sponsored by IQ Bar, which is my company, so be nice to it. What do we do here? We make IQ Bar plant protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe instant mushroom coffees. All of which are special because they are the only thing in their category that centers on nutrients good for your body, protein, electrolytes, things like that, as well as things that are good for your brain, so magnesium or lion's mane to name a few. They are all delicious. Most functional foods and drinks taste like crap. Ours taste good, and taste matters. That is despite them being super low in sugar and super clean label. There's no weird stuff on our labels. And by the way, they're affordable. Functional stuff is usually price gougy, and we are not. I will not be offering a discount code. I will instead ask you a favor. Go to Amazon.com, search for IQ Bar, IQ Mix, IQ Joe, or some combination of the three. Find a non-sponsored listing, click on it, buy it, wait for it to arrive, and leave a review. And that is the only favor I will ever ask you. Thank you very much. Eating Glass is also sponsored by Ramp. Ramp is a corporate card and spend management software that we at IQ Bar have used for 5 years now, I think. And I actually reached out to them about sponsoring, not the other way around. I love them for 3 reasons. Number one, simplicity. Everyone on our team gets a physical and a digital card. Replacing cards, pausing cards, putting limits on cards, insanely easy. Setup takes 10 minutes. Number two, cash back. 1.5% cash back. You don't have to deal with points. If you're messing around with points, you are wasting your time. Just get cash back. Number three, they are better at categorizing spend. So we not only save money on the cashback side, we save time on closing our books because they're just better at classifying. They give us an incredible offer for you guys, $250 free when you sign up for Ramp today. Go to ramp.com/glass. That's ramp.com/glass. Cards are issued by Sutton Bank and Celtic Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Mike Beckham. You're the co-founder and CEO of Simple Modern, a giant drinkware company that I think most listeners will have probably heard of. And you bootstrapped that, which we'll get into, and then profitably grew it to, I believe, something like 225 million in sales this year. You can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. But you've said in past interviews, that is not the full scope of your identity. You're not one of these CEOs or founders who like, that is you, you know, your psychology goes as the business goes. So I guess I just open it up with a question, a very simple question of who are you?
Yeah. So part of what makes my story atypical is that I've been out of college, I guess, for about 25 years. And you could take that and split it into almost two fairly equal halves that overlap. In the first half, I was in the nonprofit world. So that was a surprise to me that I got into the nonprofit world. It was a surprise to me that I stayed in it as long as I did, but deeply formative in terms of who I am and how I thought about things like what I wanted to do with my life, mission, purpose, things that I enjoyed. It was really transformative for me as an individual. And by the end of that, I'd kind of gotten to a place where I didn't think I would do business. And then obviously, like, you know, that has worked out and business has been a big part of my story. But I think to understand me, you have to kind of understand that duality that I'm a person who probably has natural giftings with numbers and business, but that in terms of understanding how relationships and people and community and culture and spirituality and meaning and purpose impact the quality of life that we have. I think that's something that started in college and has really, really carried through my 20s and has turned me into a very different type of entrepreneur than I would have been if those things hadn't happened. So I love talking with other operators because I am very driven. I'm very motivated by being excellent and by challenging myself. I feel like I'm at home when I'm talking with other operators. I think the thing that I tend to bring to the table that's a little bit different is because of the way that my career arc has gone, I've spent a lot of time thinking about questions, bigger questions of like, what am I actually trying to accomplish? What is meaning? What is real quality of life? And as a result of that, now that I'm an entrepreneur that is running a company that has really significant scale, really significant profitability, I think I have a pretty strong sense of what I want to do with that. And hopefully that's helping me to be better at my job. Most of the content out there is about, hey, here's how you make money. Here's how you get your business from 0 to 1. Here's how you scale things up. Here's how you go through a big acquisition. But one of the things that all three of us know, that's kind of and even, gosh, Joe, you could speak on this. Most business people, when they go through getting to, insane profitability or an acquisition or something, they wake up on the other side and they feel pretty empty and a little bit lost of like, hey, okay, I quote unquote won the game, but so what? I don't feel any different. I'm not feeling the things that I hope to feel. The intentionality that I've tried to approach building a business with has been a little bit different. And we can get into that if you guys want to with Simple Modern. We're a very atypical company in terms of our culture and mission and things like that. So I think that that's what typically makes me interesting to people. I mean, the story is a good story. We're one of the fastest growing private companies in America over the last 8 or 9 years. And, the bootstrapping and all that stuff. We're a consumer brand that, at this point, I think this month we manufactured our 50 millionth piece of hydration. So we've got really, really mass scale in terms of the number of customers. But to me, what's always made the story so interesting is that there's actually quite a bit of depth behind why we built the company, how we built the company as well.
There's so many paths to entrepreneurship. Like some people get a job at McKinsey and realize they hate it and don't want to do that for 30 years. And then they go into a startup. Like some people do a startup right out of school. But it strikes me, you have these two distinct experiences before Simple Modern that sort of like made you enlightened. And I think in a large way informed how you set up and engineered Simple Modern, which are the nonprofit you worked at for, I think it was something like 9 years. And then it was like 3 and change years or something like that at Quibids. Very different experiences, but it seems both of them fundamentally informed how you set up Simple Modern. So like, how did the nonprofit thing inform it? And then how did the Quibids thing inform it? And the Quibids thing has so many variables too, right? You did it with your brother.
That's a crazy story in and of itself, right? So I think some of the ways that my previous experiences shaped me, as I mentioned already, one of the things that I took away from nonprofit ministry was investing in relationships, having a real dream for my life. My wife and I got married pretty early when I was 23. I actually think that was a major advantage for me, that I've had a lot of stability in terms of my core relationships and in terms of my family life since a very early age. So pretty early on, there was an understanding that, okay, deeply investing in relationships is going to be a thing that makes me happy. And I just pause here to make a point that like what everybody's after is quality of life. And everything else is a proxy that we think we can use to get to quality of life. So money is just like a thing that hopefully we can convert at some kind of rate to get to quality of life. And I think that the nonprofit world where I made no money, I mean, my first year I made $18,000 and I had to raise it. I remember that the credit card, we ran everything through our credit card. It had to be $1,500 or less. I could spend no more than $50 a day, or we were really going to have a problem financially. And so during that period where we didn't have any resources, it just became so clear to me the things that did drive quality of life and the things that didn't really, or the things that the exchange rate of that to quality of life was good and the things that the exchange rate of that was bad.
How did you know that a giant bolus of money wouldn't create great quality of life? Right? You didn't have the counterfactual, because so many other people would have taken a different mental tack and said, this is great, but it could be even better if I had a boatload of money. Why was that thought not there for you?
I think that everybody has that illusion to some extent. And we tell ourselves that story. Things are great, but they could be even greater. I think the thing that I experienced was that I was very happy and very content. And so it was like, okay, if more money, could stack on top of this, that would be great. But I feel great about the people I spend time with and what I'm doing. And, it's interesting when they do research around wealth, one of the questions they'll ask is how much more wealth would it take for you to feel, happy, comfortable, content, whatever. And no matter what the wealth level of the person they're asking, they always say something like 20% more. So, the person with 100,000 in net worth says about 20,000 more, and the person with 100 million in net worth says about 20% more. And all I think that does is it reveals something about human psychology, and that we're just wired to think, if I just had a little bit more, I'd just be a little bit happier. It's pretty powerful when you can actually start to realize, like, okay, two things. One, my contentment, my happiness is not actually tied to my circumstances. That's a pretty big breakthrough. I think that happened in my 20s. And then I think the other thing is understanding what happiness and contentment really feels like. Because for a lot of people, it's kind of like before you really experience being in love, you kind of think you have an idea of what it's like, but it's just based on things you've heard and, what you've seen in maybe a film or a movie. And so it's really difficult to understand, what does that feel like on the inside? So I think that I started to actually have a sense for, like, okay, here is what, really feeling purposeful, content, happy feels like. And I'm doing that when I'm making no money. And so it kind of established this foundation where I realized I could be very happy in a lot of different circumstances. Now, obviously, we've gone through a situation where my net worth has gone up like 1,000,000% or whatever. And it's pretty much borne out exactly what I expected, which is there are parts of that are great, but there's also trade-offs. So in the areas of my life where it's gotten easier or even more enjoyable, there's also responsibility and difficulty that comes with that. And this is one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I have hundreds, if not thousands of people that their livelihood depends on me making wise choices, right? And that's tough. That's just challenging. So I've got the ability to buy more things or to do more things, but I've also got more responsibility over here. I have to have more hard conversations. My time's more encumbered. So, okay, those are trade-offs. And I think that this is generally how it works with, if you're successful in business or if you have more resources, you anticipate all the good things that'll come with that. You don't necessarily think through all the trade-offs. Like another example of this, it's really simple, is that the more that you have money and people know you have money, the more that starts to impact the way that your relationships look. And that's a downward drag on relationships. It just is. And so it's one of the reasons why a lot of my closest relationships are people that go back 10, 20 years. They're people that really predate all of the money. There's certainly great things about having resources. I'm definitely not complaining about it, but also there's a lot of trade-offs that come with it. So 20s, I really got a strong sense of that. I got a strong sense of, like, hey, if when I'm 70, if this was true about my life, I'm going to feel satisfied. I'm going to feel like I used the time really well. And then while I was doing that, I helped my brother start a company that in 13 months, it took it 13 months to go from founding to its first $1 million revenue day. It did about $1 billion of revenue in 7 years. And this was, I would still say, fairly early on in the internet. AWS was not a thing. We had physical servers. We had physical servers that melted, like we put too much traffic on them and they literally melted. This was a thing we had to deal with at one point in the growth of that company. And I think what I learned through that is I learned about really scaling something, growing something, the power of the internet. And I learned a lot about the skills that I brought to the table in terms of just, business strategy and numbers and stuff. And you could kind of say simple modern is those two things coming together in a really interesting way.
What did you like and not like about Quibids though, right? It was such, a lot of people might say, wow, that's like insanely rapid growth is so great. And I might say, that sounds terrible, right? Because that's such an artificially high growth rate that like no human can keep pace with. A lot of stuff had to be breaking. There had to have been infighting to some degree, right? Like what were the downsides of all that?
When you're growing something that fast, it feels good because there's so much stimulation, right? There's always something to think about. There's always something moving, but it's also overstimulating. Like you get used to your basal state is just tons of stuff going on, tons of stuff to think about. This is a really terrible analogy, but it's funny. I was reading this article about a guy who broke into some kind of a medical supply place, and he stole a bunch of Viagra and took it, and he ended up having an erection that lasted for 5 days, and he had to check himself into the hospital. There are certain things in life that like in doses are great. You know, at the extreme amount, they're just like, they're really hard on your body. And I think scaling is hard because you're so overstimulated that to some extent, having normal conversations and kind of getting into a healthy pattern is really difficult. It's really easy to neglect your body. It's really easy to not sleep enough, to not exercise. It's really easy to just eat terrible, right? You're just grabbing burgers. It's really easy to find yourself sitting in a chair 14 hours a day. And so I think one of the things that came from that period is because I was in really good shape when we started to grow that company. And then I realized after 3 years, I was like, I'm not in good shape, you know, because all I'm doing is typing on a computer screen. And that's a really common story from people that have grown things really quickly as well. You mentioned the other thing, which was my younger brother. He's 2.5 years younger than me. He was the CEO. He was the primary shareholder. And I came in and basically helped him grow that business. I was kind of in charge of the economy and analytics for a while. And then I was COO for a while. And we had some great times, some really high highs, and we had some really low lows. Like there were levels of conflict that we went to that we'd never had before. I think that we came out the other side with a stronger relationship and a deeper appreciation for each other, but it was tough, man. And I can see why some people are like, man, I don't want to do business with family. And I can see why other people, it's been a really great experience for them, but it was challenging. And when I came out of the nonprofit world, I thought, oh, I'm this great leader. I'm really great at leading teams. I'm really great at culture. And then I stepped into a different culture and a different context with my brother. And I realized maybe I'm not as good a leader as I think I am. Maybe I'm just a really good leader in a particular context. One other thing we're saying is I didn't think when I signed up for this that this thing was going to be around for 8 or 10 years and do whatever $1 billion in revenue. I was like, this is a fun little side project. And this is one thing that's hard about entrepreneurship. It's hard about marriage. It's hard about determining, you know, business partnerships and a cap table, is that you make a decision that has these incredible ramifications on your future, but you don't understand what's going to happen in the future, right? Like when you kind of decide to be business partners with somebody, you know that there are going to be some hard parts of that because life happens and they're going to change and you're going to change and unforeseen is going to happen in business, but you have no idea what those things are, right? Like what are the hard things you're going to go through with that person? In the same way, whenever you pick any idea, you're not necessarily like, I mean, I'd ask both you guys this question. When you started your businesses, did you have any idea that they would go as long as they did, or that they would, you know, so much of your life would be dedicated to thinking about things like protein bars or, you know, people taking notes?
For me, I was just wildly surprised by that one product could take it as far as it could. We already started to think about, very early on when we were like $3 million in revenue, we were starting to think, all right, we've got to diversify to other products because this product is not going to take it very far. And we were just so wrong. And we also thought that this wasn't going to be, you know, we would have to sell this company at some point very soon, and that it wouldn't, you know, be like, you know, life-changing money. But then as we got more and more success, we started to see the opportunity in front of us. And only after that success, like we had investors, not a lot, but we had a few investors kind of come to us and say, we're interested. And I was like, I don't want that type of pressure. My first head of operations said, I'm going to quit my family business so I can focus on Rocketbook. And I was like, as a friend, I don't suggest you do that. Like, this is a crazy, wacky idea. But then success mounted on success and it became undeniable. And then my co-founder and I started to get very bold about what this company could be. And we actually saw the opportunity as, you know, a potential, you know, 9 or 10-figure potential company that could be, you know, bigger than, let's say, Post-it, which is another big brand in the stationery industry, right? And then we started to get really, really bold. So just what we wanted out of the company just completely changed from day one, you know, to a few years in.
Yeah, for me, I would say I thought about it in the macro and forced myself not to think about it in the micro, meaning I know I'm going to be successful. I always thought that from day one, whether that's delusional or not. Like, I never actually thought we were going to fail. Even if we were close to failing objectively, I never thought we were going to fail. So I always knew we will win because we just have to. I didn't know how we would win. And this even bleeds into like projections. We project a little bit differently than other companies. We say we want to grow, let's say 100%. We don't know exactly how we're going to do it. And I think we were overall right on the macro, and the micro just like played out how it was going to play out. So I was just super ignorant about it, but almost intentionally so.
You guys made a couple great points. I think one is that in consumer, because of the scale of the internet and because these markets are so big, really frequently the answer is to just, more than anything else, it's to grow the core. And that it is really tempting the first time you have an extended period of adversity to be like, well, I gotta do something else. I gotta bolt something else on, I gotta diversify. Maybe it's time for an exit. And it's interesting, like Joe, what you said, I've talked to so many people that's their experience. And that then you break through that and you realize, oh my gosh, we were, just a fraction of the scale that was there. I felt that a couple of years ago with Simple Modern. We had grown every year, like you're saying, Will, like we had grown, gosh, I don't know, almost triple digits every single year. And then we hit a period where we weren't growing at all. We basically hit a wall, and we started reaching like, okay, we're going to launch Marvel.
Was that 85 to 95?
That's exactly when we hit it. We hit it in the 85 to 95 range. And there was this point where it was like, okay, are we kind of at our total addressable market? Like I'm managing the other people on my team and they're getting kind of antsy. We start kind of reaching for growth in some ways. This is right when the COVID supply chain was a mess. And what happened after that is then the next year we unlocked basically a double. And this year has been even more growth on top of that.
How did you do that? How did you go from stagnant to doubling?
Some of it is fairly straightforward, that like there were sales channels that we hadn't unlocked, but a lot of it was just brand. I mean, drinkware is a really interesting market in that no one has more than 10% market share. I have not found a market quite as fragmented as drinkware. There might be one, like my wife suggested makeup, and I looked and it's like, well, L'Oreal has, I think, 18% market share between it and all of its, but that's pretty fragmented in and of itself, but drinkware is exceptionally fragmented. And the other thing with drinkware that's happened is it's become even more fashionized as a category. So it's funny in retrospect. If you just say it like this, it sounds ridiculous, but we were probably at 2% market share, and I felt like maybe we've capped out. And it's like, no, you haven't even come close to capping out, but you're going to have to figure out how to grow market share. And yeah, you're going up against some pretty fearsome competitors. Like you're going up against Yeti. And like even during that period, one of the things that's really amazing is we had a double during a period where Stanley went absolutely bananas. And this year we're growing where another competitor, Owala, is just having an unbelievable year. I don't know how much this is like public knowledge yet, but it's like they're having a Stanley-like year right after Stanley had that type of year. To me, I think one of the things that the internet has really helped me to see is that the world is really, really freaking big. And there's a lot of good humility that comes in consumer from just realizing how big the world is like you think you've built something big, when you hit your millionth customer, and then you realize there's 8 billion people in the world. And it's like, oh, okay. Like our penetration's actually really low. The hard part about business is that there's not always this like direct chronological lineup of doing the right things and results. So when I think about unlocking that year of doubling growth, I mean, some of it was one main product that really crushed it for us, but some of it was that we had the right instinct about where the category was going in terms of fashion, and we'd kind of started to really lean into that from a supply chain perspective so that we were primed and ready when the opportunity presented itself.
What was that? Was that color? Was it styling? Was it?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically as a category, it's going to be trends, it's going to be colors, and it's going to be form factors. And so this is not going, my category is not going to work like, a Bic. Bic is a great example on the other end. Like there's a great Bic ad where it's like, here's the Bic, 50 years ago, here's the Bic 30 years ago, here's the Bic 10 years ago, and it's the same exact thing. And my category is like the exact opposite. Like what the best-selling product 3 years ago looked like and what the best-selling product today look like is really different. And it's going to continue to evolve So we had to kind of adjust our mindset, like, hey, this is what we're in. We need to have a really agile supply chain. We've got to leverage the power of the internet to be able to talk to people and really be on the edge. We built some domestic manufacturing capabilities where we can actually make things on demand in the US. But I think part of what's difficult about being a leader in a business is that often the most successful things you do, you don't get that success immediately. You don't get the instant gratification, especially once you get to scale, right? Like that I'm setting up things right now that'll probably pay off for the business a year or 2 years from now, but I'm not getting the kind of sugar rush of them immediately showing up. The other thing that happens as you get to scale is for something to become, meaningful, it has to produce a lot. So when you're at 200 plus revenue, it's like, well, if I want to get 10% growth out of something, it's got to do $20 million. And so the bar gets higher in that way as well. There's this interesting idea. I was talking to our chief marketing officer. He worked at Kraft before he came and worked with us. And I don't know, I was maybe talking about one of our competitors or somebody, some other brand, and saying, man, I bet it feels good to be them right now. And he was like, you know what? Everybody has something that sucks. And he was telling me about how at Kraft, sometimes he would be in charge of a division that, they were putting up 10% growth, but all the other brands were putting up 15% growth. So you felt like you were failing. He was like, even the Oreo guy, the guy that ran the Oreo desk for Walmart, it was $1 billion business. Like they sell $1 billion of Oreos back, years ago just to Walmart. That's pretty crazy. Even though he was dominating, it still was a stressful job, but in a different way because there were expectations of how much growth. Like his expectation was he had to grow Oreo by 5% in Walmart every year, even though he's at $1 billion base. So he's got to figure out how to get $50 million of incremental Oreos sold every year. And so I've come to kind of term that as the Oreo Principle, that no matter how your business is situated, there's something that's challenging about it. We tell ourselves this lie that like, well, if my circumstances, if I was number one in my category, if my growth rate was X, like then I would be content. It's like, no, you just have a different set of stressors, right?
We're in such a hurry to grow rapidly in consumer goods and to get bigger. And then you realize once you get bigger, like you said, a lot of that sucks. You have a bigger base you have to grow on. It's a fundamentally different job, right? So you're adding in levels of bureaucracy into your organization. You have more people problems. When you have a mistake, the mistake compounds and multiplies to a way greater degree. Right? There's all these things where it's like, being an overdog is really not that great. Being an underdog is pretty underrated.
When we were a challenger brand, there are a lot of things about that were more fun. Now, there's a lot of things that suck about that, right? Like there was a year that I couldn't pay my estimated taxes and I had to like sign something with the government where I was like, hey, I'm really, really sorry. I promise I won't do this again, for it to not get some huge penalty. Like, because we were that tight on cash that it was either, do I pay my estimated taxes or do I buy this inventory that I need to buy? So like that part sucked, the part of wondering, hey, when do I get out of hand to mouth? That part sucked. But being a challenger was fun. Now we're an incumbent brand. We're one of the people that everybody has in their crosshairs. And so that's, and there's parts of it that are great and there's part of it that are challenging. And this kind of goes back to something I've been thinking and talking about more recently, which is, I think if you're an entrepreneur, you really have to ask yourself, like, what am I trying to get out of this? There are a couple of different groups of people in terms of their psychographic like interest in being an entrepreneur, and the outcomes that they want to pursue, I think, should be pretty different. So there's one group that's like, hey, I want to not work for somebody else and I want to create financial freedom for myself. And for that group, I'm like, hey, when you start to get to traction and you can do a transaction, you should do it, right? Like you can take 5 million, 50 million off the table, like do it, right? Because there's only responsibility ahead, right? Like the difference between having $10 million and $150 million in terms of quality of life, in terms of what you can buy, is almost zero. But the difference in terms of responsibility is massive. But there's a different group, and this, I kind of fall in the second group, which is the motivation is I have a restless mind. I like solving problems. If I had nothing to work on, I don't know what I would do. I'm not the type of guy that can go play golf every day. So for me, the reward of having a business is that every day I have something interesting and compelling to work on. And I like the idea of one of the ways that I serve other people is by running this business. And so for me, it's like, okay, it's worth the trade-off. It's worth all the extra responsibility and all the negative things that come with scale to keep doing it, but it's definitely not for everybody. And I think this is one of the reasons why usually you don't see CEOs that founded something make it all the way up to 200 million in revenue, because at some point they're like, hey, like you said, I'd rather be a challenger brand. I'd rather work on a new problem. I mean, I'm in my 9th year of thinking about water bottles. And I'm like looking at a career where I may spend 30 years thinking about water bottles. And water bottles are fine. They're great. I don't think at any point, in my 20s, I had it on my bingo card of I'm going to spend 20% of my waking moments thinking about water bottles, right? But like that's one of the sacrifices that comes if you're really going to build something big and you're going to stick with it for a long period of time.
I want to talk about product. So you sort of have a series of narrative violations that I love around just these tropes in consumer goods about product. So one trope would be solve your own problem / do or sell what you love. That's kind of this trope. I solved a problem for myself. For you, it could be like some fake PR story. I was really thirsty in a park and it was 100 degrees out and I had a Stanley and it wasn't doing the trick, right? Like people cook up these fake things, or even if they are real, whatever. And you took such a different approach. I listened to an interview you did where you said, we sat down and we said, what are we really good at? We're really good at e-com. We know a lot about e-com. Amazon is this arbitrage opportunity. Drinkware is, people aren't doing drinkware well on e-com. Or actually, I think you looked at a lot of categories and you started with like a tea infuser and like a mat or something. And
baking mat. Yeah,
baking mat. And then you like pivoted into drinkware. So you didn't even start there. And so it's just so A versus B is so wildly different there. And you thought, okay, you really started with like go-to-market advantages and backed into product versus starting with product and then figure out how you're going to go to market.
Here's a way that I could kind of crystallize the idea. Where is the kind of opportunity for entrepreneurs in the market? And what I would say is generally there are opportunities for things that did not exist to come into existence, but that is easily the minority of opportunities. It's actually pretty small. Like how many truly new kind of ideas, innovative products come into our lives every year? It's a handful at best, is my assertion. If you look across, what's being sold and on a dollar basis, it's really small. The opportunity is really that our world has a shortage of excellence. I would assert that if you do something with excellence that helps serve a group of people, the market compensates you and compensates you very well for that because there is a dearth of excellence. And there are a multitude of things that people have bought for a long time and they'll buy for a long time in the future. And if you just show up and do that thing with excellence, you're going to do fantastic. I mean, a really simple example here is like Chick-fil-A does more dollars per square foot in 6 days than anybody else does in 7. And it's a chicken sandwich. It's a fried chicken sandwich. There is nothing special or innovative about their menu. They just do it better. They just do it with better excellence. They have cleaner restaurants. They have more courteous people working. Their drive-through is more efficient. They just do it with excellence. There's even a lot of fried chicken places. The only thing that sets them apart is they do it with excellence. And I definitely stepped into a category where it's like there was some innovation in terms of how they were using vacuum insulation and lids. But generally, it's like, you know what? People have needed something to drink water out of for all of human history, and they're going to need it for all of human history in the future. And they just want people who are going to solve that problem with excellence and serve the market with excellence. And so for aspiring entrepreneurs, like I think I have a lot of hope to give in terms of saying like, your ability to be a successful entrepreneur is exceptionally high if you're willing to say, what can I do with excellence? Where am I willing to pay the cost? And where do I have the talents to do something with excellence? And that I don't care how new or novel or mundane it is, I'm going to do that. You're going to do great, right? Like this gets talked about all the time. Like people will be like, I needed a plumber. I needed my windows washed. And it was hard to find somebody who would even show up and give me a quote. Like you show up into a market and you do it with excellence, you're going to do well. Unfortunately, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank, for example, but unfortunately that show is a good example of like, we're feeding the narrative of come up with something totally new. And that's just not what the vast majority of successful entrepreneurs do. Did you invent protein bars? You know, like even I would say, Joe, yours was more innovative, but it was really just an iteration on something that's, you know, age old, right? Like the need to take notes.
I'll also build on what you said, because we did by default decide to become Amazon first. And it actually created a very interesting dynamic in our company's and team's focus. I remember when we were about 4.0 or 4.1 on the Amazon rating system, right? And it shows up as 4 stars, and that last star is blank.
Everybody who sells on Amazon knows 4.3 is the cutoff to get that little half star. Yeah.
You know, I said in OKR, here's how many 5-star reviews we're going to get next quarter, over and over and over. And it was way more than we were getting. And it was to set the path to getting that. I was telling everybody we have to get that 4.3 so that it becomes a 4.5-star looking icon. And part of it was pride, but also I knew that conversion rate would increase when people saw, you know, 4.3. And we just created a squad that was a multidisciplinary team from all over the company to focus on every week. We'd start the week with our ideas that we wanted to implement that might nudge that up, right? Someone in product would get some feedback that, you know, they got some feedback. We implemented like this survey system from customers. So we had a stream of information coming in. Then we could detect little problems or big problems, et cetera. And we just grinded on that week after week after week. A little bit, you can only gamify things so much on Amazon reviews. There's a little bit tricks you can play, but mostly it came down to just focusing on what the customers were saying and their complaints, and then making changes on each manufacturing run. When we set that goal, we didn't know how we were going to reach it, but we knew that that was our compass and we were going toward that. I mean, I remember when that thing turned, the whole company went crazy that day, right? And we celebrated. But the point is that it was the first time a distribution channel actually presented this compass for you to focus on and work on, right?
Yeah.
It's the Amazon's reviews are the gold standard, and it sort of dictates, you know, where you are in the world. And so that gave us an amazing focus on taking this product that had some innovations. We could have just rested on the innovation of it and said, no one else has something like this, but it forced us then to refine it and make it us the most excellent version of ourselves.
For us, we did not have the money to really market, and we couldn't make D2C economics even work early on in the company. And so people ask me all the time, like, okay, how did you do this? How did you basically, without dumping a bunch of money into marketing, how'd you build a consumer brand that's at this scale? And the answer is just our net promoter score is like 90. And that comes from excellence. People will talk to other people about things that are truly excellent. And it's amazing. It's like skiing downhill when all of a sudden customers are doing a lot of the work for you. So I just couldn't overemphasize how much, if you really say, I am excited about entrepreneurship and whatever I do, I am going to do it at a 95th percentile, at a 99th percentile, like that's the formula. That's the recipe for being successful, not being novel.
How does a water bottle get a net promoter score of 90 in a category I think that's very hard to differentiate? How do you create a raving fan?
To your point, when I first got into this category, this would have been 2016. Yeti had been really phenomenally successful. They'd basically taken this vacuum insulated technology had been around for a long time. Like Thermos was using it in the 1800s, but Yeti was probably the first person to popularize this idea of, well, wait a minute, if you can use it to keep things hot, you could also use it to keep things cold. And nobody had really been thinking about that application. And so Yeti had been really successful. And right around that time, Walmart got very interested in this, and they started to do some private label. Like Ozark Trail was probably the most readily recognized one, and they were selling something that was basically identical to the Yeti tumbler in quality at $9, and Yeti was selling it for $30 or $35. And there was really a moment where I was like, man, I kind of think this category might get commoditized. This might be a short run. And that's not what happened at all. In fact, what's happened since then, over the 8 years since then, is that the ASPs in the category have actually gone up a ton, not gone down. And it's become much more brand centric. But the reason is because in this category, customers are really looking for a combination of factors, and price is just one of them. And I think the trend side of it has been like how you drink out of it, and innovation around lids, and then what it looks like have ended up being really important to customers. So we recognize that, or that was our insight pretty early on, and we leaned into that. And as a result of that, we had probably the most compelling, we talk about our brand kind of set at this intersection of style, quality, and value, where you're getting you're getting all the colors and the relevant style, and that you're getting like A+, very top of the market quality, but you're doing it at a price that's really affordable. And because of that, people were just tremendously satisfied with us. And they very quickly, people are like, well, why would I buy something for $20 more when this is just as good or better? You know, like if you look at our Amazon reviews, we were getting better reviews even than people that were priced at the top of the market, which goes back to quality. So we found a way to deliver, A+ quality, but to do it even more affordably than our competitors. And that was a real winning combination.
My take is it's not excellence, it's relative excellence, or it's an excellence arbitrage, meaning your excellence relative to your competitor's excellence. So like an example I'll sometimes give is like, I would not be the best management consultant. I know that. I did an interview with Bain and I totally bombed it. And I just objectively looked at that, and I had a lot of friends going to that field or banking or whatever. And I was like, can I get to the top of this field? And the objective answer is no. But even though I might have been excellent on a relative basis, I would not have been.
You might have been 90th percentile, but that's not, relative to the people interviewing at Bain, you weren't going to be an excellent candidate is kind of what you're saying.
Totally. And so I looked at like food and bev, not to like take away from people in food and bev, but I was just like, based on my skill set and who I'm competing with here on a relative basis, this is a much better arbitrage opportunity for me. So that was my first thought, is like the relative, to me, it's all about relative excellence. The second piece is differentiation. I think it's a massive, massive misconception, which you kind of talked about, which is people focus on differentiation as it relates to product, which is so wrong. Differentiation is all about operational excellence and go-to-market strategy. It's how you run your business and how you penetrate the market, including the order of operation in which you penetrate the market. Literally ordering things wrong could put you out of business. That, in aggregate, is differentiation. Other than those wild exceptions, Airbnb, sure, and like product innovation. For every one of those, there's 10,000 really successful companies where the differentiation hangs on the aggregate of all the shit that goes on under the hood.
And just to give an example of that, I think people would view Netflix as a fairly innovative company. I'm very familiar with their story. I was invested in 2003 in Netflix. And you know what the fundamental thing that drove Netflix to its dominance is distribution. It's an operational distribution decision to lean into streaming. I mean, people forget that when they started, they were renting out DVDs that they sent you in the mail. And then they realized that the big opportunity, the big value unlock with content was going to be able to make on-demand streaming content. And that has nothing to do with the content itself. It was literally just the distribution mechanism. And so, like you're saying, often in markets, there's an unlock that has nothing to do with product. It's just how you get the product to people, or the pricing on the product, or something that doesn't even have to do with the characteristics and feature of the product.
One thing I love that you talk about, that for whatever reason no one talks about it, and I think it's because it's just so unsexy to talk about, is price.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we at IQ Bar are successful is because we can price really competitively. And that just plain opens certain channels that you could not go in otherwise if you couldn't price that way. Costco, Sam's Club, BJ's being an example. The whole club channel, you have zero access to unless you are operationally excellent, because you just plain can't hit the price point, right? And
right.
If you are operationally excellent, downstream impact number one is you can price lower. Downstream impact number two is you have entire channels that are now available to you that your competitors cannot penetrate.
Okay, so this is awesome because it's like totally ties into, we're going to go back to this idea of competition. I think you're illustrating a point super well. When we started, it was like, we can't beat Yeti doing what Yeti does. We can't beat Hydro Flask doing what Hydro Flask does. They will wipe the floor with us. And so what we had to do is we had to say, we're going to formulate a strategy that focuses on doing something they cannot or will not do. So sometimes it's literally like, hey, that company is not built to be able to do this thing that we're going to do. They've built their company, like building to be digital first is almost like at an infrastructure level is something that we did that Yeti did not do with how they built their company. And so they've kind of tried to transition to that, but it's taken them years, like almost a decade to do it. So we built that from day one. But sometimes it's not that they can't do it, that a competitor can't do it. It's that they don't want to for any number of reasons. And that creates a competitive advantage. And let me just like highlight one that's not inherently obvious to everybody listening to this that you just mentioned. The bigger you are, the more you deal with something called channel conflict, which is you sell to a bunch of different buyers. And sometimes that's a kind of a digital buyer, like on the Amazon marketplace. Sometimes that's an actual person, like at Target or Walmart or Costco. And these buyers are basically concerned with getting the best thing on their shelf and having really good prices relative to whatever they view as their competitive set. And the bigger you get, the more of your time you end up actually trying to make sure that these buyers aren't mad at each other or mad at you because one of them has a better price or one of them has an exclusive color that the other one doesn't have. The way that this maps to what you're talking about with club, the smaller you are, the easier it is to do something. Like let's say Costco comes to you and says, hey, we want to sell this thing that you've been selling on Amazon for $15. And if you're Amazon only, you can say, well, we sell it for Amazon on 15, you want to sell it for 12. Okay, we can do that. But when you get to be, I don't know, say Z-Bar, for example, Z-Bar's got like 50 considerations they've got to think through before they say yes to that deal. And what people don't see is on the back end, there's all kinds of money flowing around, basically to make people who are unhappy about Costco having that deal that they don't have happy. And so Z-Bar might be like, I just don't want that $12 deal. It's volume, but I just don't want it because of all the other implications it has for my business. Whereas somebody that's, a challenger brand might be like, oh, this is great for me. And so this is actually part of why you can be a challenger brand and you can be successful. Yes, the established incumbents are going to have more resources. They're going to have the distribution, but they have a lot more limitations. They have a lot more lines that they're not willing to cross or that they really don't want to cross. And if you can do a good job of identifying what those things are, it's really easy to see where the white space is that you can slide into. And that's why challenger brands will always be possible in CPG. I mean, the other reason, which is fairly obvious, is that as companies get really big, they don't invest in innovation, they buy it. And so they just are not fast to hit trends. And that almost always comes from challenger and incumbent brands.
Everything you said is spot on. It's very category specific. So for example, that's our Costco pack. What's cool about bars is you can do the price pack architecture such that we sell an 18 pack to Costco, but we sell a 12 pack to Sam's and BJ's, and we sell singles to Sprouts, and we sell 12 counts online, right? The unit is small enough such that we can have enough permutations such that we can have a price pack architecture that actually makes everyone happy, right? Whereas maybe in drinkware, it's kind of a tough sell to sell someone 10 pieces of drinkware, right?
And you're changing out lids, you're changing out colors, you're changing out ounces. It's the same principle. And this is just like a very tactical thing, but I would say to anybody listening to this, the moment that you get past one channel, the easiest way to do it is to have different SKUs. And we kind of understood that earlier on. And the bigger we get, the more that we understand that in any way that you can, through count, through sizing, through colors, through whatever, if you can find a way to make what each channel has different from each other, you're going to just save yourself a ton of grief. Now, the downside to that, but this gets back to another point you made, is that, well, there's more inventory risk, there's more operational, chops that you need to make that happen, but it's worth it, in our experience at least.
I was just thinking about a great quote from Seth Goldman, the guy who started Honest Tea. And he would get the question often of, well, why doesn't Snapple just crush you like a bug? You do more or less what Snapple does, but you have less sugar. Why don't they just come out with a couple SKUs that have less sugar and just demolish you? And he's like, well, it's very simple. They can't.
Yeah.
Because they're going to contradict themselves and threaten the mothership.
That's exactly right. These organizations, the bigger they get, there's actually a great book, Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Solution, which are all about this. They're about, even often inside of a company like Snapple, they see it. They're like, okay, low sugar, this is eating market share, this is where things are going. But the entire inertia and build of the organization makes it where it's irrational for them to get into it. And it seems counterintuitive from the outside, but it's very intuitive when you actually think through the game theory and the incentives and all that.
Yeah, to also build upon what both of you were saying about excellence and comparative differentiation, right? It's actually much easier than you think, because let's think of it in terms of comparative excellence, but also when you do it in a way that'll introduce the word combinatorics, like on a few dimensions. It's really hard to be in the top 1% of like value or price to your customers, right? Your procurement has got to be amazing, right? It's really hard to be in like the top 1% to differentiate in style or top 1% in quality, right? But you could be in the top 20% for value. You can be in the top 20% for quality. You can be in the top 20% for style. And when you multiply those all together, 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2, you get 0.08. So now just by being very, very good in three things, you become amazing, especially when it's something like price, which is very hard for an incumbent to zig and zag on. Scale kind of creates a cement around your business model eventually, and you no longer have the agility. And now, a challenger can come in and just do a few things slightly different and start to, carve their own path that an incumbent can't chase after.
You're nailing it, man. I mean, it's the recipe of multiple value adds that ends up making all these categories. It's what dictates the winners and the new challengers that do well. So for us, we were able to find a recipe of 3 or 4 things that mattered to customers. If we were just competing on price, we're going to get smoked by the Chinese, right? Like there's no way. It's coming direct from factories. We can't compete. We can't be top 1% on price. If you're trying to be top 1% on style, you're going to get smoked by the specialty people that are doing much smaller volumes. Like there's no way we can do that. If you're trying to be top 1% in quality, like you're using these bespoke materials like titanium and stuff that are just like, and your quality standards are so high that you have, huge yield issues. Like it's just trying to pick one category and be top 1% is almost unachievable for almost any startup. But if you can find the recipe, and the way you find the recipe is you talk to customers. This is one piece of conventional startup wisdom that is very true. Like successful entrepreneurs, they find ways directly and indirectly to just gain tons and tons of insight about what customers want. And they view their job as serving people. What is it that people want? What are the kind of recipes they're looking for that the market's not providing that I could provide?
Winning on one variable is very, very hard to do, if not impossible. It's also more assailable. It's easier for someone to attack one vector than it is to attack 3.
Unless you have like a moat, like a patent, or like a government contract or something that is just almost an unassailable moat, then you've got a business that's going to get disrupted because, okay, let's say you're top 1% in quality. All it takes is one person to figure out a way to take it to the next level. And like the entire premise that your business, functions on and wins on is gone.
The SKU thing dovetails with this too, right? Because there's so many like layers to it. You have many vectors you're great on within a SKU, and then across a category, and then even you play in multiple categories. So I guess a platform, you're also excellent at one level up, right? So you're excellent in licensing over here, but also creating a great target SKU over here. And it's the same form factor, but you have vectors across different retailers, styles, etc.
I'll give a perfect example of this that's going on right now. We are crushing it at back to school. And let's like kind of deconstruct the recipe to crush it at back to school. So, we do water bottles really well, right? And like the actual like size, we know the right size. We've got like lids that are really high quality. Okay, we do water bottles really well. But also we have a licensing arm. So if you want to get certain licenses, we're in a pretty small subset of people that can even offer that thing. And we've got this incredibly expansive licensing portfolio. Okay, well, that recipe's starting to get more interesting. Oh, and we do this at a price that's fairly affordable. Okay, that's interesting. But okay, wait a second. We don't just have water bottles. We also have backpacks. And we also have lunch bags. So if I want to actually buy something cohesive for my kid, we're shrinking down the universe even more. I want to buy a cohesive set of Bluey things for my child to go to school. Okay, my subset of people I can buy this from, it's getting pretty small. And oh wait, we have domestic manufacturing, so we can laser engrave your bottle and we can, embroider their name on the backpack and the bag. Well, now you're literally, I think you're in a subset of like 2 or 3 companies in the world. If you want Bluey for your kid and you want their name on it, you've now narrowed it down to like Pottery Barn and Simple Modern and maybe 1 or 2 other players. And so that's a competitive advantage, but it's a competitive advantage born out of like 4 or 5 moats stacking on top of each other. And that was kind of the point you were making, Will. Like the licensing thing is a moat. And people, when they look at our business, they're like, well, that's the most obvious moat. And the point that I tend to make is, yes, but in and of itself, it's not that powerful. It's really powerful, though, when it's like the 6th layer of your moat, or it's like one of the pieces of your moat. And I'm really, really proud of our back to school because it is several moats stacked together. But also what I know personally is that the very genesis of this, like if you go back to 2018, we weren't selling any kids' drinkware. And my wife called me at work one day. She, this is when we had really young kids. My son was about to go to 1st grade, maybe. And she said, man, you guys have got to do what Pottery Barn does. It's so smart. And I said, let me think about it. And the more I looked at it, the more I was like, man, she's right. Pottery Barn has built this amazing business based on stacking a bunch of things. And we want to get into kids' drinkware anyway. But you know what? It took us 6 years to build that thing. Like the reason why the moat is so amazing is that it took 6 years of really hard work to be able to build it. And so I'm not surprised that it's a big value generator because it was really hard to build. And there's a really simple principle when it comes to moats. The better the moat, the more valuable the moat, the more expensive it is to build and the longer it takes. Like it's almost like a math formula that the amount of capital and hours that you have to pour in to build that moat will be directly proportional to how hard it is for somebody to be able to overcome it.
Absent artificial factors like a patent or something that literally restrict people. Yeah.
And in consumer, it's just worth saying IP patents really don't play nearly as big a role as people would think. There are certain categories and certain situations, like pop sockets would be an example where it's like, okay, IP has really mattered there, but in the vast majority of categories, IP is not a uber moat that kind of decides the category.
What's so interesting about these things is like there's no right answer, right? So everything you just said runs counter to this other trope of focus, right? So like Athletic Greens, we make one SKU, we're just going to scale that to infinity. Or Dude Wipes, we talked to Sean Riley from Dude Wipes, incredible business. They kind of try to platformize a little bit and then they're like, no, like we're a wipes company, everyone wipes their ass, we're going to scale this to the moon. I think about it more like how you think about it. I think, first of all, it's very category specific. So drinkware just is a variety category. You need variety to increase LTV. It just is what it is. And for food, flavor fatigue just is an immutable fact. I will get fatigued if I eat the same flavor 10 times. You have to have variety. We took that another level because we moved into hydration and coffee, right? So we're trying to create, similar to you, a walled garden where maybe you fatigue on the bars, but now you drink hydration and then you drink coffee and then you circle back to bars like 9 months later. But all of that runs counter to focus. If a PE showed up tomorrow, they might tell you to kill certain lines, right? And you'd be like, well, no.
Well, undoubtedly early on, they would have told us to kill several of the things that have grown into these kind of, even my CFO at one point was like, why are we doing kids licensed drinkware? Like the margins are worse than our branded stuff. And so we did have to have some of that long-term vision. One idea also that I'll stack on top here is that kind of to your point, Will, I think you always have to be focusing on multiple areas because of this dynamic that we're talking about, that moats that are singular are really, they're easy to be disrupted. It's just that sometimes you're focusing on multiple things on a product level, and sometimes it's a combination of building internal, like operational moats that complement the product. So for a company like Dude Wipes, it might be that, hey, like the advantages that you have and the moat that you're trying to build, the easiest way to do it isn't to try and sell toothpaste also, but to say, we've actually got some operational moats on the sales level or as a first mover or in terms of, our ability to become the name in the space through achieving scale. And I didn't even get into that with our back to school, but I think another piece that's made it work is we finally gotten to a competence level with our direct response marketing that all of it's coming together. And really this year is the first year that that's happened. So sometimes you're combining different product elements to make that moat. And sometimes it's a combination of external product elements and internal kind of capabilities that come together to make it work. This is where the judgment comes in, is can you as the entrepreneur or the CEO understand what the right recipe of things to create that mode is.
Sometimes they just kind of occur to you as you get moving. I remember when we were selling a lot of Rocket books, I kind of just had this realization that, well, other people who sell stationery don't have a bunch of email addresses and we did because people were using an app that worked with ours. And so once we had that realization, we just realized, oh, we're the only one in the industry who can build up a database of millions of email addresses. And ultimately, that led to just this completely different way that we developed products, the way we communicated with our customers, and ultimately was a big reason why we were an attractive acquisition target as well.
Yeah. I mean, the internet makes it possible to interact with and get the perspectives of a massive number of people almost instantaneously. And that is a moat in and of itself if you are great at leveraging that, because most companies do not leverage that. So a simple example of how we did something similar, we knew we were in a fashion category. We know the design matters. So let's go back to the Bluey example. Okay, you're going to launch Bluey and you've got 15 different ideas of the design you might launch. You make your life so much easier if you say, oh, well, we're going to send an email to 20,000 people that have bought a kid's water bottle in the last 12 months from our website. And in literally 2 hours, I've got 6,000 people that have voted about what they think's the best out of this. I mean, that's amazing, right? Like that I'm able to move forward with another, order of magnitude of confidence in buying a particular thing because I've gotten feedback from a massive number of people and I've done it almost instantaneously and almost costlessly. I think that using digital and being able to leverage digital is in and of itself, it shouldn't be, because this stuff is not rocket science, but most companies don't do this. They're not built to work this way. And don't leverage it. That can be part of your moat, is that you just use digital tools way better than other people.
And I think the order matters here too. So starting digital, then going brick and mortar, to me is a vastly better strategy than the inverse. And it allows you to do what you just did with Bluey versus if you had swapped those.
You are 100% right. And this has been exactly like when we went to Target, part of the value proposition is we said, hey, we can tell you Amazon is ahead of you on trends, and we can come and recommend things to you that we know will perform. This isn't just going to be, we did some focus groups and that this is what they liked. We're like, we can come to you with actual sales data and we can keep you right at the tip of where the market's going. And they like that. And that has proven to be true. And even now we've got retailers that are like, have traditionally, the way it's worked in our category is maybe you'll have a meeting in June where they're trying to decide what goes on shelves next June and sits until the May after that. So they're sitting here trying to decide what's going to be on shelves 23 months from now, which when you're in a trend category, like you just can't do it that way. So we're seeing some of these retailers starting to think about switching things out every 6 months. We're talking to some retailers about, hey, what if we had a spot on the shelf, but we switched it out 4 times in a year to keep you on trend? They're starting to say, hey, we think you're right. We think that's the way the category is going. Well, if you're going to be doing that, man, you better be able to leverage digital. You better be coming to the table with fresh ideas, constantly. And us being digital first was a massive advantage.
I'm really curious to get into your business model, especially where it seems like right at the center of it is philanthropy and giving away 10%
of your profits, I can't imagine a pledge of giving away 10% of your profits every year is easy, right? It's a true sacrifice. Especially, I don't think a lot of people who haven't run an inventory heavy business really understand what it's like to grow and the cash constraints around that. I'm in between perplexed and awed about your ability to carve out 10% of your earnings and give it away every year. But I would really love to hear a little bit more about how you make this possible, meaning the financials of it all. What type of gross margin would be needed? Do you think about long-term value of customers, and basically how you thread the needle with this, I would call it a constraint that your competitors don't have, and yet you're transitioning from being a challenger to an incumbent. And frankly, I have trouble seeing how you did it. So can you walk us through some of the mechanics and the financials and the tactics that make this possible?
Yeah, so I can talk for a while on this, but I'll do my best to hit all the different elements of it. And I'm just going to say to start, you're not wrong about your assessment that doing this is kind of like I'm playing the hardest video game ever and I put it on insane difficulty and then I decide to start with half my health bar. Like that's what growing a consumer company where you're giving away some of the profit as you're hyperscaling, it's insanely difficult. But I'm going to say something that's a little bit counterintuitive. I think that doing this is a big part of why we were successful. And not to say that we couldn't have been successful some other way, but I think that it has uniquely fueled our success. And I'm going to give 2 or 3 reasons why. People want to be a part of something that they feel like is bigger than themselves. This is just hardwired in humans. They want to follow someone that they're inspired by. They want to be able, when they lay their head down, they want to be able to feel like what I did today mattered. They want to be able to tell other people that they're associated with something that is respectable in some way, and that when you give them the opportunity, you can punch way above your weight in terms of the type of people that will want to join and be a part of it. Jeff Bezos had this thing where he said, basically in the business world, you have missionaries and mercenaries. He didn't use it in a explicitly spiritual sense, but he was making the point that there's a lot of people in the business world where it's like, they're just there to make money and to support their families. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're going to go where they can get the best paycheck. They're not going to be particularly cause or mission driven. It's just like, hey, I'm trying to monetize my time. And then there's another group of people where it is all about cause. And they will take less money to be able to be a part of building something or working on something that they feel great about. And we have built a team of missionaries, basically people that are cause-driven. A lot of people that work at the company worked in nonprofits at some point in their career. And we've been able to go and get truly exceptional people, like top 2-3% people, in large part because people are inspired about the idea of doing something really hard and doing something that's very atypical. So I think that those things have helped us. Here's another way they've helped us. If you look at companies, especially in consumer, that raise a lot of money, what you see is that they typically do really poorly. It's kind of counterintuitive. Just like it's counterintuitive that us being so capital constrained and giving money away, that this would be successful. It's counterintuitive why companies with a lot of money would be unsuccessful. I think being successful in consumer has a lot to do with developing the muscle of wise investments, being able to understand, here are a bunch of different places I could put money, and being able to say, well, I've only got the money to do 2 out of these 6. Which of the 2 do I do? How do I get the most bang for my buck? And we tend to view constraints as enslaving or limiting, but often constraints are freeing and not enslaving. One of the reasons why I'm able to experience happiness in my marriage is because I have voluntarily put the constraint that I am not going to have a romantic relationship with any other woman, just my wife. And that is not constraining, that constraint is not enslaving, that constraint actually is freeing. And in the same way, when we said, hey, we've only got this much capital that we can invest back in the business, it helped everybody to get really smart at how they used capital. And everybody knew that every dollar that we had in the business was really precious. What's interesting is in the last 2 years, we've broken into this, much more extreme profitability. But guess what? Those muscles are still there. The investment muscles are still there. And it's one of the reasons why I think, we probably can scale this up to $1 billion in sales. Not because I know how we're going to get there, but more because I know I've got an organization full of people that know how to invest money and think about investing money. And we're creating a lot of free cash flow, that we make wise investments. Organizations and the values of organizations matter deeply. I'll use another illustration here. Walmart, when they train buyers, Walmart's really built their company around this idea of getting low prices to people, making people's lives better, serving people through getting them low prices. And their buyers are notorious for driving the hardest bargain in retail. When they train Walmart buyers, the way that they train them is they say, we want you to imagine when you're negotiating with a supplier that we want you to imagine the millions of people you're representing, and that every penny you're able to claw back from that supplier is a penny you're putting in the bank account of those millions of people. That's who you're fighting for. That's why you should feel great. Even if you make the supplier angry that you drove such a hard bargain, it's worth it because of all the people that you're serving. In the same way with our team, it's very motivating when I say, listen, when you do your job with excellence, when you're able to make that lid that's just a little bit better, where we have a 1% refund rate instead of a 4% refund rate, when you drive for that extra 5 cents in wholesale with Target, when that marketing campaign is at a 5 ROAS instead of a 4, well, guess what? Somebody just didn't get trafficked. Guess what? A town of people you'll never know, all of a sudden they've got clean drinking water. A kid that grew up in the wrong side of town in their city, all of a sudden they're getting a quality education. Now, you're not going to know them, probably, but it happened. And that's motivating for people. And again, this is what motivates missionaries. This is what makes certain organizations kind of transcendent. They're not just jobs, they're causes that people are part of. And that's really what I think we've been able to build. And why we have such strong culture is that everybody is in on this idea. And they're in on leveraging their skills to be able to do something like this. So, but even still, my role as CEO is to push. And we're going to roll out a new kind of branding campaign next year. I think we'll be at $10 million given away cumulatively as a company. But now what I'm pushing the company towards, even more than a certain net income goal, I'm like, we're going to get to $100 million given away in the next 5 years or 7 years. We're going to find a way to get there. And so interestingly, instead of targeting a net income number as much, I'm kind of working backwards from how do I make the shares of my ESOP that all my employees have a part of, how do I make those so valuable that our company has this legacy of turning almost everybody in the first 100 employees into a millionaire? How do we do that? How do I make part of the legacy of our company that we gave away hundreds of millions of dollars? And then I'm thinking about, okay, what does it take for me to do that on the financial side? And you guys, I'm guessing as you're hearing this, it's like, okay, yeah, that's pretty motivating. Like, I would love it. I'd love it to have a leader. I'd love it to have an organization that was thinking that way. And not surprisingly, that's why we've just been able to attract just phenomenal people. Final point I'd make here. One of the ways that you really build values into an organization and you really know what your values are is when you can tell stories that are true about the sacrifice that you had to make for that value. And that's the litmus test. And for us, probably the most defining moments in the company's history are when things were really hard and we still chose to be generous. Like during COVID, there's an example of that where, it's like everything was falling apart. You guys know, you guys went through it. And we actually chose to lean into giving more during that period than we ever had up until that point. We pulled forward a bunch of giving to do it because unemployment rates had skyrocketed to 15%. That was both scary, but it was also foundational. Like everybody on the team was like, oh yeah, we are really about this thing. And so as a result, I think that it certainly has been hard, and I've probably got more gray hair than I would have if we had not done it this way. But I don't think I'd have anywhere near the quality of team and organization that we have if we hadn't done it this way.
That was awesome. Here's my take on everything you just said. This is from an outsider perspective looking at your business. And you can correct me if any of this is wrong. Number one, I think the sacrifice probably helps sales too, right? When you sit down with Sam's Club or Walmart or Costco or Target or whomever, my guess is they eat that up. They love that.
Yeah, I can kind of confirm that. I talked with the buyer who bought our initial program from Sam's Club recently, and I was just telling her, like, hey, I gave you a lot of credit when I talk about the her name, Amy Legrone, and she was an amazing partner. She was the first buyer that bought us. And I was just telling her, like, I give you a lot of credit, Amy. And she said, I believed in the product, but more than that, I believed in you. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. Like, people forget how much business is still relational for thousands of years. Like, if you think about even, I love to use this analogy. 2,000 years ago, if I wanted to buy bread, you know what I did? There were 2 or 3 bakers in the city, in my town or city, and I knew which one had a good relationship with his wife and which one was kind of a drunk. And like, I voted with my wallet, right? And this is how we're used to doing business. We want to buy from people that we like. So I think you're absolutely right there that it matters.
That said, I don't skip without saying you didn't know at the outset for sure that it would work out well in your favor and that maybe you'd get some people would give you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it took real balls. It took real sacrifice to start a company and run it this way. And, if you got some benefits along the way from some of that, that's great.
Yeah, you have to do it because you want to do it, not because you think somebody's going to respond to you a certain way. But it is also simultaneously true that, and I think this is kind of like a truism about people and about life, that people are reciprocal. If you live your life in a way where you're really serving other people and you're about the right things, it will come back in ways that you could never anticipate. You don't do it for that reason, but it is simultaneously true that there are all kinds of things in your life that will go better or go differently because of that. And so for sure, there's definitely some deals that we've gotten along the way and some breaks we've gotten along the way because people just believed in a world of a whole bunch of different people making water bottles. They believed in the cause behind our company more than others.
We could do a whole like half hour on the relational versus like data driven thing. I think everyone on Twitter and whatnot, they nerd out on data. And it's like, hey, just so you know, I have like $50 million of brick and mortar business over here that had nothing to do with data. Just so you know.
Absolutely. Well, you're never going to grow bigger than a certain size if everything's transactional data driven. Like especially in consumer, like there is a real hard cap you're never going to get past if you're not great relationally.
All right. Second point, excellence plus loyalty plus buy-in equals more than 10%. So I think we forget how it's sort of boring and maybe obvious, but like how excellent your people are, how loyal they are, and how bought in they are is so much more than 10%. It's like not even close. It's like probably 40%, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Third piece is you guys are not sexy. And I mean that in like a good way. You're in Oklahoma. You're not in Manhattan. You're not in Austin. You're like literally down to your geography is not sexy. You're not loud, right? Like your notoriety to sales ratio is so much different than like a Yeti or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkably different, right?
So all of that wraps up into like, it helps me sort of understand how you did it, but still, I'm curious, just literal like numbers, how do you do it? So was there a gross margin number? Like, let's get into like the actual like metrics. Was there a gross margin number, a cash conversion cycle, timeline, etc., that made it possible? And then how literally did you finance it?
The easiest answer here is that our Amazon business was really good at generating cash, especially early on when we were figuring out wholesale and it wasn't generating as much cash. And that number 2, we developed banking relationships. And at this point, we have a $50 million or $60 million revolving line of credit with JP Morgan. Now, at this point, the business is at a place where I don't even think we'll use it at all by the end of this year because we've gotten so cash flow positive. But there were really important stretches where we needed tens of millions of dollars of credit to fund the working capital and the growth and whatever else. And if a lot of e-com businesses don't have this at all, and my advice is, making your business bankable is doable, and you can structurally, like from developing relationships with bankers and helping them to understand what you're doing at a level that they have comfort lending against it, in the way that you operate your supply chain and your inventory, doing it in such a way where you're bankable. Like that was an absolute game changer for us, is that we were able to really prove, hey, this is a bankable business. And that opened up tens of millions of dollars that we could borrow against. And that created a lot of the flexibility. If we had not had any kind of banking support, I don't think we could have done it.
That was my sense, right? We are really, really, really capitally efficient relative to peers. We still had to raise close to $10 million. We were only 7 people. We didn't get cash flow positive till we were at 25 million in sales. It just is a scale game. And now we're at the point where as you grow, you could be 20% EBITDA positive and have cash crunches all day long because the orders from big retailers just get a lot bigger every quarter. So you need a line of bottom line, unless you have a 80% margin and you're selling perfume, you need a line of credit.
If you're building a business that is not bankable, your odds of survival and your odds of thriving go way down.
How do you become bankable?
2 or 3 characteristics that I've seen. I mean, one is it is about relationships and relationship building, going back to a thing before. Ultimately, there is a person that is responsible for not losing their depositors' money who is trying to assess, are you a person I trust? Second, do you have the ability to consistently put together projections and hit them? Bankers want to see this. This is one of the more counterintuitive things if you're growing a company, is that when you're growing a company, you think growth is good. Growth shows competence. Growth shows health. Growth, makes people want to join my team. Of course, growth would signal to a bank good things. Growth signals the exact opposite to banks. It signals risk. It signals danger. So if you're growing, which hopefully you are, what you have to realize is the faster you're growing, the more important it is to be able to forecast what's going to happen and show that you can hit that. Otherwise, banks are just not going to want any part of you because they're going to see that growth as just high variance and high opportunity for things to go poorly. And then finally, I think you just have to start from the perspective of the mechanism banks have in order to protect themselves if things go poorly is to repossess inventory and sell the inventory. So you have to, at a really atomic level, convince them that if everything goes to hell and you repossess my inventory, you could resell it for 50 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar. If they do not believe that, they will not bank you because you don't have collateral. So making your business, making the inventory in your business, the assets in your business collateralizable is the big key, because every line of credit, every loan is based on collateral. So if you can do those 3 things, you're on your way. And then the other thing I would say is our first line of credit was $50,000. And we grew that to $50 million. So you can also start really small. If I had a business doing $5 million in revenue and I had no credit, I would start with going and getting a $50,000 line of credit. Is that going to impact my business? No, but it's like getting a credit card. When you're 21, you've got to build credit sometimes. It's the same thing. And I worked with the same banker from $50,000 all the way up to a $7 million line of credit. And along that way, as I showed our ability to execute, our ability to make projections and hit them, and our relationship grew, he went to bat for larger and larger amounts. And by the time we got to 7 million, it's actually interesting because we were working with a local bank. The guy we were working with, Jesse, was a fantastic person. He recently passed away of cancer. He came to us right around the beginning of COVID and said, hey, you're just getting too big for our bank. And so it wasn't great timing. But we had developed such a track record that when we went out to market, everybody wanted a piece. JP Morgan wanted a piece. That's who we ended up going with. All the banks were interested because we had that track record. So by the time we needed to go to that next level, we had a track record where a lot of the multinational banks thought we were very bankable.
Well, hey, what do you say we get into some rapid fire questions?
Okay, let's do it.
If I were to start a company today, should I be an Amazon seller or a vendor?
You would have to start as a seller. If you got to a certain scale, I think, you're probably approaching the point where you could start thinking about being a vendor. If you're growing, I think there's a chance that you can switch over to being a vendor and get a better arrangement than you would get in the marketplace. It does have some to do with your margin structure and your ASP and, without getting too much in the weeds, but everybody should start as a seller. If you are really growing you're at a certain scale, looking at vendor can be good. The big advantage of being a vendor is that you negotiate your pricing with people and that you have actual people that you're talking to.
All right, next question. Our Peter Thiel question, and that is, what important truth do very few people agree with you on?
Fundamentally, a lot of my views about the God, the purpose of life, and money are pretty atypical. I think I've learned as I've gotten into, like actually talking more about my worldview. Laying down your life for others actually leads to the highest satisfaction. And the more you try and grasp at it and try and get things for yourself, the less satisfied and the more bitter you end up getting. For example, that's pretty counter to, that the idea of the way that you have the most. Another one is like, I think people have had it right for most of human history in the way that they defined happiness and contentment. And that in our modern culture, our idea that we're somehow more enlightened is kind of silly. That we have the same wiring and the same things are true about us, but we think because we have iPads that we just have so much of a better bead on human nature. In a lot of ways, I think our ancestors understood human nature and understood life a lot better than us because they had a lot less distraction and a lot less, so I think there's a lot of things around that. Obviously, me talking about giving and some of that stuff, that's pretty countercultural. I mean, I'll give one here that taps on the spiritual side of things. I think that fundamentally what everybody wants to do is they want to believe that they're a good person and that they're really good. And my kind of prevailing worldview is that actually we're pretty flawed innately. And we go through life wanting to convince everybody that we're really pretty good and our motivations are really good and that a lot of our motivations are really selfish and really flawed. And at the moment you like kind of break out of that duality and you realize that's true about yourself, it kind of opens up the potential for who you can become as a person and how you can change. But you can't really do it as long as you kind of are believing the press clippings and the stories you tell yourself about who you are and why you do what you do.
What are some commonly cited platitudes about what it takes for a startup to win that are just plain wrong in your opinion?
I mean, I think the whole idea of like, do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I love what I do. And listen, I have grinded at points. There are so many points where it is about want to. It is about, I'm freaking tired and it's 2 a.m., but I'm going to 4 because this needs to get figured out and this needs to be done. So I think the general idea that maybe kind of ties in with that of that your heart and your emotions and passion should guide everything. And like, if you just do that, it's all going to work out, I think is basically false. I think that you end up loving what you work hard at and what you invest in. Part of the reason I love my wife so much is I've been married to her for 21 years. I put 21 years of hard work and time and effort and money into that relationship. So of course that's going to be valuable to me. Like, do I innately love tumblers? No, but I love this company. And I love this company because I've poured 9 years of my life and countless hours into the thing. And so I think if people can grasp that you are going to end up deeply caring and deeply valuing whatever you deeply invest yourself in, and that the more deeply you invest yourself in something, the more likely you are to be successful. I think that would be really helpful if people understood that.
Mike, if you were a product, what would your value proposition be? And what would some people maybe dislike about the product?
I think Simple Modern's a great encapsulation of me. Like, I'm not flashy. I'm not the cool thing, right? And part of our value proposition is we do something at this insane quality level. We just do it at a better price than other people. I think for some people, I probably toe the line of kind of virtue signaling where they're like, is this guy real or is this just an angle? And I get that, and that's okay. For a long time, we talked about, are we even going to talk about our giving? And we were like, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about it at all. And where I ended up coming out, because like I said, listen, guys, I was in nonprofit world. I was literally a missionary. So I'm going to have a very missionary approach towards building a company. My thought process was, if by being very transparent about what we're doing and why we do it, I can motivate other people that lead businesses to make a different type of business that makes a bigger impact on the world, then it's worth it. Even if some people kind of roll their eyes when they hear about our giving or whatever else. And so I think that Simple Modern is in many ways an embodiment of me and my ethos.
What is your single biggest mistake or regret with regard to your startup journey?
It's hard because I'm proud of the thing in its totality. And even though I could pick parts, I don't know if you get the totality of it if you start kind of going back and doing revisionist history. So it's always difficult. And it's also difficult because I think building anything is so messy that the expectation that it wouldn't be messy, or the idea that I wish I could go back and take out the messiness of that situation, is kind of counter to the whole idea. But I would say I would have tried to grow as a leader even more than I did early on. I think early on, I viewed myself as a great leader, and I was leading by just being the strongest, best executor on the team. And I think sometimes I really gave off the vibe of, if all of you would just kind of keep up with me, then we would do great, you know? And that's not the type of leader that I wanted to be. I think I kind of viewed myself as this kind of like entrepreneurial terminator, and that, you know, I motivate by just being the smartest and the best and like the most endurance. And I think over time I've grown out of that. That was immaturity. But that probably persisted for the first, 1 to 3 years of the company for sure.
Well, how did building a startup affect your personal life? Positively, negatively? Anything that it changed you as a person? Anything that you lost during the process?
Yes, you lose things. Like I've gained things and lost things. Fortunately, there's not a wake of bodies and a wake of broken relationships. That was something I was really intentional about. I'm not going to be a person that leaves a wake. But my kids are now 12 and 9, and I was really deliberate about trying to be there as much as I could. But there were many times that I was there, but I wasn't all there, because part of the cost is that, you always, you guys know this, like you always have the responsibility and the things running through your head. So that's one of the things I lost. Like I lost the ability to be able to be as present as I wanted to be all the time. I think it was worth it. And I think my family would say that they still got something close to my best, but I feel that. And then I think just generally the responsibility that's come with the company has, life is a little bit more heavy in general. Like I like to have fun. I like to joke around and all that stuff, but life is more heavy because I'm in charge of hundreds of millions of dollars, and a bunch of people's jobs depend on me. And like, it's important for me to be the person that I want to be and that I say that I'm going to be. And so I feel the responsibility of that. One other thing I would say, I've been thinking a lot about, how do I not let this wealth ruin my kids? How do I manage all this money in a way that it actually improves people's lives and doesn't make them worse? And it's so funny because that seems like it would be easy to do, but the more really wealthy people you talk to, the harder you realize that is.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is one of the reasons why philanthropy is such a big thing for me. And this is why I do a lot of things like this, where I'm trying to help other entrepreneurs. I mean, I think one of the things that's become obvious to me is that there's a lot of things that money just simply cannot do, that there's real limitations to it. And so I have a personal kind of goal of, I want to make more impact with my voice and by sharing information and knowledge and experience than through my money. But I definitely think giving is a big part of it. And then I think the other big way that I can do it is by creating businesses, creating jobs. As a guy who has been in the nonprofit world, I think the biggest way you can change the world is by being an entrepreneur, because of the ways that it can transform communities, transform customers' lives. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, in some way, decisions I make impact tens of millions of people, and that is a tremendous amount of opportunity and responsibility. And the same is true with the money.
I'll say it definitely influenced me during this conversation. So as I look forward to the business or businesses I want to work on next and how I want to focus them. So thank you.
If that's true, it makes it worth it, because I do think we are at an interesting inflection point where capitalism and the companies that work well in the years to come are going to function a little bit differently. I think this idea of kind of more stakeholder capitalism, where you're really thinking more holistically about everybody that works at the company and the customer and the community and all that stuff, as the internet's making it more and more transparent, the way that companies work and who's behind them. I just think people are going to be eager to vote for those type of companies. And I think those companies end up making this incredible impact on the world. Like, one of the things I've started researching more is companies that did that, with the way that they treated their employees and the way that they use their resources. I mean, there are entire cities that if you look back and you see the history of that city, you're like, that city was completely transformed or partially built off of that company and the way that that company approached things. So I get very motivated by that idea.
What excites you now and what gets you out of bed in the morning?
I still love challenge, and I love finding ways to solve problems. And I love talking about these things. Like, even this conversation was really like, I think there were 2 or 3 things that even I take away from this conversation that I've not thought about before. I think that idea that you gave during this conversation of like, hey, if you're top 20% in 3 things, then you're in the you're in the 0.8%. That's a really interesting thing. And that's like, I love problem solving. I love learning. I guess I'll end with this thought. From the outside, a lot of people think the reward of entrepreneurship is that maybe I could get an exit. Maybe I could get this, kind of outcome. Maybe I wouldn't have to work for anybody else. And people have asked me if I want to sell the company. And I continue to think it's very unlikely I'll sell the company. And one of the reasons is if I sold the company, I would take all that money and I'd immediately try and recreate the day-to-day experience and the environment that I'm already a part of. Because the reward is I get to be a part of this, that every day I wake up and I've got interesting people to talk to, and I've got coworkers that I really enjoy, and I've got problems that need a solution. And when I solve them, it impacts and improves people's lives. And that's actually the reward. It's less extrinsic rewards now in my life, and it's more intrinsic rewards. And I think when we center our life around intrinsic rewards, we find contentment, we find purpose, we find endurance, and we end up living, the best version of our life.
You're like in the top 1% or 1% of 1% of people with, in my opinion, with regard to a lack of need for external validation. I think entrepreneurs have this chip on their shoulder, myself included, where I'm like, I need to win. What does that look like? It looks like an exit or an IPO. And then all these people look at me and say, you won. And also you make a lot of money, right? So that's also like a win. And you, for whatever reason, don't have that in you. And it's like super rare in my opinion. And then the second piece I would say is one thing we didn't really talk about, but just in listening to your old interviews, I thought was just so genius. One of your most genius moves that a lot of people would tell you not to do is you hired all the people you knew for 10 plus years. And I think it was 14 out of your 15 first employees you'd known for over 10 years. And so many people would tell you not to do that. Just like so many people said, I shouldn't work with my wife, which I do. They don't get that if it's done right, it's like the absolute best thing you could ever do, both for on the output side of things, but you're synergizing professional and personal in a way that is such a ridiculously good life hack that it's just hard to overstate how much of a hack that is. I know it because I do it on my personal relationship side, and you do it with members of your community or whatever, but we didn't really get into that, and I think that's something that needs to be called out too.
All you and I did is we just ventured further out on the risk-reward curve, right? We just upped the risk profile even more. It's already really risky to be an entrepreneur, and by bringing in relationships that really matter to us, we ventured further out on the risk curve. But you know what else we did? We opened up the reward side even more. And that's pretty much what I would tell people. If this thing had failed, listen, I wouldn't have just lost money. I would have put a bunch of my closest friends out of a job. But because it worked, the upside has been way bigger even than a typical company. And so in some ways, I think what you and I did just showed even a higher willingness to bet on ourselves. And I love what you said, and I'll tie it back with a concept about not needing external validation. It's interesting how many moats are cultural and character based. And this just doesn't get talked about almost at all in the business, kind of podcast world. But guys, listen, a bunch of the reason we've been so successful has had everything to do with culture and character. And I think you nailed it. I think being secure in who I am has allowed me to do very kind of counter prevailing wisdom ideas. And it's allowed me to build the team that I have. And it's a big part of the success. I don't know that people want to hear that because, a bunch of the things that we've done along the way feel like they would be hard or they'd be sacrificial. But I absolutely think they're a big part of why we're successful. And just as a single idea to kind of encapsulate that, one thing that you have an absolute monopoly on and a moat on is your culture and the character of your team. And it matters not what any of my competitors do. They can never take away my culture and they can never impact the character of my team. Those are things I have 100% control over. And you really are truly in control of your own destiny when you are deliberate in those areas and when you view those areas as, how you're going to win.
This has been such a great conversation. Mike, this is fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Guys, this was awesome.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our sponsors, IQ Bar. Go to Amazon.com, search for IQ Bar, buy one, wait for it to arrive, leave a review. Please leave a review. Reviews are massive. Our second sponsor is Ramp. Go to ramp.com/glass. They give you $250 for free when you sign up. It's the best credit card / spend management software there is. Use it for years. Love it. If you like the podcast in general, subscribe, review it, tell a couple friends, tell your mom, and tune in a couple weeks. Talk to you then.